Hello and welcome to episode 19 of No Time to Cry. We're your hosts. I'm Shannon,
And I'm Laura.
and today's episode, again, we're wanting to just diversify a little bit into a couple of different topics of just different areas where I suppose big changes in your life that cause you some sort of grief or loss, not necessarily related to individuals. It could be related to yourself even, or a family member. And again, it's come on the back of um one of our listeners reaching out to us and opening up a topic. So we will talk to that a little bit in terms of what that exact individual said, but we want to go over this would venture into sort of long-term health conditions, looking after somebody with long-term health conditions, neurodiversity, whether that be yourself, whether that be a child, or another family member, could be a sibling, for instance. And just look into that a little bit more. I think there's some personal circumstances for ourselves that we can talk about, but also um we'll have a look at some of the listener comments, and then we can talk to that a little bit more. But I think it's a really important topic, and something that seems to be quite a big conversation at the moment, like across society. There's obviously a lot of comments, and it really, really irritates me when you see this, where people say, oh, it's just a trend now to be like autistic or ADHD and things like that. And it's like, well, okay, well, maybe try living with it and see if it feels like a trend. Like that is definitely a conversation that's happening across the board. Um, and it's something that we want to talk about a little bit more, definitely. So, Laura, you mentioned something before we started that you said that you'd be happy to talk about. Do you want to go into that a little bit to start?
Yeah, sure. So after you've had a baby, you often have a couple of checks at the doctors. They obviously want to make sure that, like, physically you're recovering, but also from a mental perspective that everything is okay, I
Yeah.
guess, ultimately. And I sort of opened up for the first time to my GP to say that actually over the last 2 years I have faced a lot of difficult and challenging situations that perhaps I haven't fully come to terms with, and maybe there are certain elements that I have maybe not faced head and dealt with just yet. And she pretty much straight away said you need to speak to somebody. Um which I appreciated, because sometimes you kind of need to hear that, I guess, from a professional that's in
Yeah.
that field, don't you? She just said, the 2 years of your life, the last 2 years of your life have been, you know, pretty incredibly traumatic, and some people don't even go through a couple of those things in their lifetime. So you've just been through a lot in a compressed time. And I've never spoken about it to anyone who is obviously qualified to give
Yeah.
advice from a psychological perspective. So yeah, I have finally made the decision to venture into a little bit of therapy. So
And did she indicate what she thinks might be going on for you? Obviously, if you're happy to share.
yeah, no, of course. That's what we're here for. Got to be vulnerable and
So.
honest. So I just feel very on edge a lot of the time, and quite sort of in fight or flight mode, which she said can be the result of quite heightened anxiety, potentially a little bit of like PTSD as well.
Mm.
Through, of course, losing mum suddenly, but then also having two pretty traumatic experiences with having babies as well. Not so much so with Eleni actually, but with Sienna, I was in hospital for
Yeah, it was
weeks.
also your birth was very traumatic.
Yeah. So they weren't straightforward. And just becoming a mum without your own mum is quite seriously damaging, I guess, to how your experience is as a mum. Just
Mm.
speaking openly and candidly on that. I never in a million years thought I'd be in a position where I became a mum and didn't have mum to support me or to go through the day to day of it with. And
Yeah.
actually, the more and more that time has passed, 2 years now makes me think, oh, like, what would life have been like being a mum with my own mum here?
Yeah.
So there's that element of it too. So I think all in all, I've just been quite badly affected by everything. And of course, as we spoke about in the last episode, like my levels of cortisol, I just can't bring down. I just constantly feel stressed and sort of I don't really show stress, do I either, Shan? So
No.
that isn't always a good thing because it comes out in ways that you don't want it to, and it can really affect how you feel, and then eventually you just blow up.
Yeah.
So I just don't ever want to get to that point really. So yeah, that's why I've decided no, now's the time to be the best possible mum that I can be to my girls and kind of just look after myself and get a little bit of the help I maybe need. So
I think as well, it's sort of like some of the symptoms that you're sort of suffering with, they could be so many different
exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Like it's near impossible to say, you know, that's like postpartum or that's depression or that's anxiety or that's just PTSD from the situation you've been in, or maybe it's related to something else. I
Yeah.
think unless you investigate it, you'll never know. And then if you don't investigate it or you don't get support from like a GP or a therapist or whatever to investigate it, it's really difficult to solve because um so I was diagnosed with PTSD years ago, actually. Which I don't know if we spoke about that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
know we have, but I don't think we spoke
yeah.
about it on the podcast. Or maybe I mentioned it on the episode about my dad. But years and years before my dad even died, I just had quite a, I don't know, busy childhood, traumatic childhood. How do you want to
The
put it?
PG version.
Yeah, the PG version. It's like it's not your standard childhood. I think you can probably all grasp that from like the stories I've spoke about with my dad. And there was just a lot that comes alongside that. So anybody that's come from a household that unfortunately has had a lot of alcohol or drug abuse or whatever that may be, I'm sure a lot of you will agree that that does impact you. Um, there was an event, I won't talk to it because it's not my story to tell, but there was like another event in like my close family where somebody ended up in hospital. Um, and it was just a month or so before I was moving up north. And when I moved up north, I really suffered with anxiety because I was leaving that person behind who was, really suffering themselves. And I'd been there at that time. And, it's a very long story. Like I say, it's not my story to tell, but there was just a lot going on. And when I came back up north, when I was going to work, came up north for the first time, I was moving, I was 19, just turning 20, moving up north. And I started a new job in the October, and I was getting into the office and I was having really bad
Yeah, I
palpitations,
remember you
panic
said.
attacks, like bursting into tears. And I didn't know why. I couldn't, but like, and Jamie was saying to me, what's wrong? Like, what is it? And I just said, I don't know. And they referred me to occupational health. This is the first time I kind of spoke to anybody. And I told them about a bit about my childhood, a bit about what had been going on. There'd been some crazy stuff with my dad that had kind of come back up as well. That other family member being poorly, me moving up, and they were like, yeah, I think you've got PTSD. And I think there's something about your workplace that is completely unrelated, but when you're walking in there, it's triggering your flight or fight. And
Mm.
that's what's causing you to have the panic attacks. And I was like, wow, well, I don't know what to do with that. So I actually had a little bit of time off work. Um, I went and spoke to somebody via a GP. I think it was to do with CBT. And naturally, life gets on top of it. I started a new job. I left that company because I felt like that specific company was causing some of the things that were triggering me. I'd kind of worked that out. And the job that it was talking to people that were basically in a bad space. They were struggling with their finances. It was like a financial advisor role. And I think that that's what I was really struggling with is like, obviously, I've left some things back in London and stuff like that. And I'm up here, and then you're listening day in, day out to people
Mm.
saying they're having a hard time. And I'm quite an empathetic person. So that would hit me quite hard. And then I don't know, it was obviously just triggering something in me. So I started a new job, and then I didn't do the CBT. And then my panic attack stopped. So I was like, oh, okay, like I'm just going to keep going down this road. If I'm all good, I'm all good. And then obviously over time, um, I've obviously told the story of how I got into therapy before. And then we've ventured into a little bit more as to what that means for me in terms of PTSD. And obviously there's been a lot more stressful situations that have gone on since then that have probably added to that or not added to it, but I've definitely got coping mechanisms now because I know it's PTSD driven, there is certain things that you can do with that. Um, I always find it really difficult. Me and my therapist have had lots of conversations about some of my other symptoms, whether they are PTSD driven or ADHD driven. So,
Or a combination
or
of
a
the two.
combination of the two, which is what we've spoke about. So I've never been clinically diagnosed with ADHD, but I certainly show a lot of traits of somebody that has ADHD. But some of those traits cross over with people that have experienced trauma. So
Mm.
I don't think that it's as important to. I really appreciate like the whole label thing and like being diagnosed. And that might be something I do in the future where I look down and say, if I needed medication or something like that and I was really struggling, then maybe I would go down the route of saying, do I want to be clinically diagnosed? But I think finding certain ways that support you in terms of just processing your mind. So my therapist has said to me about having a book in the car that when I finish work, I write everything down and I tick off what I'm doing the next day. And then I leave the book in the car. So I
Mm.
don't bring it into the house. And then just same with bedtime, just to try and silence my brain a little bit because my brain is just so loud, like all the time. And that rears its head. Sometimes it's quieter than others, but it's definitely there.
It's like a physical representation of leaving it
Yeah.
behind for the day, isn't it? I suppose. And
Yeah.
people say, I suppose, like you have mentioned there as well, Shan, writing things down, having a tick list or a checklist to sort of give you an idea of like your progress for the day and that actually everything else can wait until tomorrow. It's kind of similar in some respects to how people journal as well,
Yeah.
because that can be something that takes a little
I've
bit of
tried
that
that. I
heaviness
found that
out.
really hard, but I know a lot of people that do it and it's really good for them.
But again, isn't that so interesting though? Because some people love the idea of journaling. That's what helps them to take some of the pressure off. And equally, like for yourself, it didn't work. And I think
Yeah.
it's the same with. I agree with you totally on. Yes, to a point, I suppose getting a diagnosis for whether it is something neurodivergent or an
Mental health
illness,
or
mental health,
illness, yeah.
whatever that is, sometimes can be quite reassuring that you're like, okay, this is why it's happening, and now I
Yeah.
can figure out the steps of how to help myself to navigate through it. But on the flip side, as you've mentioned, not everything fits into one box.
No.
And I think sometimes that can happen, can't it? It can be like, oh, well, it's quite common, isn't it? That, say, for example, somebody with ADHD might have autistic traits.
Yeah.
They're not
So,
autistic, but
yeah,
that's,
exactly that. And that's where it gets confusing.
yeah. And I think ultimately that's where you've got to think, well, yes, it's super helpful to know, okay, like this is who I am and this is some self-discovery, I guess, on why I am the way that I am, but it's so nuanced. There are so many like idiosyncrasies in like the way that you are as a person. And
Mm,
and as we know, ADHD presents as an example, very differently in women to how it does men.
yeah. As does autism.
Yeah. So I suppose it can be quite overwhelming, can't it? To be like, why do I do things in a sort of not in a typical way?
Yeah.
And then understanding why that happens must be like, really comforting. But on the flip side, I do think you can sometimes get caught up in, oh, but I'm different in this way.
Yeah.
And
So that
I'm the
means I'm
same.
not that. That means
Yeah.
I'm not that. Because I think as well, and we obviously don't need to talk in great detail who individuals are, but we've known people that have had like diagnosis of autism that have then it's made them kind of, I suppose, grieve themselves a little bit in terms of like their personality and different ways that they are, and they've struggled with that diagnosis. And then I've got other friends that have been diagnosed as sort of odd ADHD, but they tell everyone they've got ADHD because there's some form of stigma that
Stigma,
they've got
yeah.
attached to telling people that they've got autism. And
So
it
sad.
is really sad because I think you just have to embrace like that's what
It
makes
makes
you
you special. I think
you.
it actually makes you, yeah, it makes you unique. It makes you, I don't know, a lot of all the people actually that I know that are neurodivergent are just such incredible personalities and they
Yeah.
just have so much extra colour and,
I just think if we all thought about everything in the exact
oh,
same
would everyone
way,
would be
it'd be
dead
so
boring.
boring. Like if like even when we
Mm.
talk about any experiences in life, the way that our brains work are very different. We think about things, some things you'll think about, and I go, I've never even thought about that before,
Yeah.
or the other way round. And that has to be celebrated rather than going, oh, that's a bad thing that you think that way. It's a bad thing that your head's so busy.
It's just a
Well,
different
it
perspective,
could
isn't
be
it?
seen as a bad thing, but actually, it makes me very good at my job because it means that I can handle multiple different things at different times, and I don't get confused because I'm going into one box, another box, bang, bang, bang. Sometimes it
Mm.
can be overwhelming. You've got to be careful of
It's
that.
balancing that, isn't it? But
Yeah,
it's even looking at it from the perspective that a huge majority of business owners and people who have these incredible ideas that become CEOs, founders of
yeah,
businesses are quite typically like
neurodiverse,
yeah. And that's because, you're happy to take risks and you've just got an extra
yeah,
creative flair in
and
you
you
that
fixate.
yeah, and you become super hyper obsessed and hyper fixated on things.
But sometimes
Um
that's what you need to get a business up and running and having that commitment, whether that be your
mm.
choice that you've committed to it or your brain quite literally not allowing you to do anything until you've achieved what you've got fixated on.
And it has some really massive positives, doesn't it? But I do also sympathize and empathize with, you know, somebody super close to me, of course, has ADHD, is newly diagnosed as well. And in some respects, I think it helps them to understand, okay, this is why I am who I am. And at
Mm,
first that was comforting. And then a couple of weeks after, they found it really difficult and
yeah.
felt like, oh, there's
Or
something
what's my
wrong with me.
personality as well? Like,
Yeah.
is that my personality or is that a trait of
Yeah. Am I still
ADHD?
myself? Like, you're not just the label that it says on the tin. Your diagnosis isn't just who you are. But I think now, they've been able to understand things a little bit better because they were in a headspace of thinking, I don't know why I'm like this. I don't know why I'm getting overwhelmed. I don't know why I start things and never finish things. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with
Yeah.
certain behaviors and I just can't seem to understand who I am and why I do things. Um and that's important, I think, isn't it, to get that understanding and that help and
Yeah.
support, because then you can figure out what that looks like for you. Because this particular person that I'm speaking about is interesting because I also spoke to a really close friend of mine about their diagnosis, with their consent and stuff. And it was interesting because that person had a completely different idea to how they wanted to treat their ADHD.
Mm,
Um, and funnily enough, my friend who I'm referring to, she initially started by taking the approach of medication, right? Because
yeah.
that's quite often what's sort of put
Yeah.
forward. It didn't agree with her at all. She kept changing the amounts that she was having, the dosage, that sort of stuff, and it just wasn't sitting well with her. She was like, I know that I need help with who I am and how I'm doing
Yeah.
things, but it's actually making certain things worse and it's
Yeah.
exacerbating certain stuff. Um, and actually, she ended up going to a psychologist instead, and decided to go down the route of understanding from that perspective how she could help herself. And I think she's been diagnosed for like 12 years now, so quite
Yeah.
some time. And she's not been medicated ever since,
But I think
which is
that's
really interesting.
also what, yeah, like a big part of that is a lot of research into like neurodiversity has been done on
Men, yeah,
males.
men, yeah.
So it may well be that the medication that she needed would have never have supported that if it's not been looked into, whether the way that the females' brains work
Yeah, very true.
with neurodiversity, whether it be, did you say ADHD?
Yeah,
ADHD or autism responds in the same way to
that's
that
it.
medication as they do male. It's honestly, it's such a big broad topic, but I think
She's superhuman as well. If you were to meet her, everyone that meets her is like, holy shit. Like,
yeah,
she's just like a really incredible person and she's in a super, super high up job.
yeah,
And I know at first she says, I used to she would say to me, I used to mask this part of my
yeah,
personality and who I am. And I was like, that's so sad because that's literally what makes you so
you who you
amazing.
are.
And now she's able to be who she is in work as well as outside of work. But there's just certain things that she does to ensure that she
Yeah.
comes across in a certain way, I guess.
Yeah, of course. And I think that comes with any personality, like whether you're like neurodivergent or not.
Yeah,
Like
like you're
you.
totally different at work to how you are.
But you
Just
know
just
what? It's
generally. So
interesting. I was listening to a session. It's like a global women in leadership session, um, and they were talking about like being different at work and at home, and that actually me being different at work is a variation of masking,
Yeah, of course it is.
because
Yeah.
that's what I need to do
To just get through your
to
role,
get
to
through
be
my
who you
role
are at
and to do what
work.
I need to do. And I suppose of to work with certain individuals and stuff like that. And then they were talking about authenticity and being more yourself. And they actually said, well, it's not about necessarily how you do that. You need to find a business that is accepting of the authentic version of
And
you.
unfortunately, not all businesses are. As
No.
much as there are businesses that will say, you know, they want those types of people within their organisation because they're bloody brilliant at what they do and who they are. Unfortunately, there are still some pretty traditional businesses that don't understand it and
Yeah.
will have that negative
I think
connotation.
as well, some of them are just not willing to make some of the adaptations that you may need if
Yeah,
you are somebody that's neurodivergent. Or it doesn't even, let's take away the neurodivergence. I think some of what mine is, I'm quite a dominating character at work. I'm not like that necessarily in my home life
you're
as
not at all
much.
now.
So, but I've had to be that way to really get to the position that I am at work.
You've worked in male dominated industries as well. I think
Yes,
that's a big
every
part of it.
industry. So, and even now, like I'm definitely finding my feet more so in like the business that I'm in now, and working out what that looks like for me, and saying, do I need to be as dominant as that? I'm not sure. Um, but even then, my team is all males, right? So
Mm.
again, I'm trying to work out what am I, what are learnt traits of mine, what am I masking, what am I doing. Um, I'm quite a creative person. I paint, I draw, I design stuff. I'm always something creative is going on in my head. I live on Pinterest creating all different boards for every single event or item or something that goes on in my life. There's some sort of visual aspect of that. And a lot of the jobs that I've had haven't played into that field.
No, a lot of them are very like data specific,
Yeah, and like
data driven,
corporate
and
and
but well, yeah, corporate
yeah,
essentially,
there's a
yeah.
corporate world. So there is a massive part of me and part of my personality, which you can definitely have some creativity with data. It's just not how I use my creativity personally. That has been kind of put aside, masked, or put in a little box for when I'm at work. And it's
Hmm.
trying to work out. A big part of me doing the podcast is letting some of that creativity out, even the way that I edit it, or the way that we talk, or the way that we pull things together.
Yeah.
You're not always going to be able to tick all of those boxes in one workplace and still achieve what you want to achieve. So it's finding the parts of your life where you can let that version of you out so that you still feel like you're authentic. Because I know a really, really close friend of mine got diagnosed with autism a couple of years ago, female. She was in her 30s when she was diagnosed. Um, and it actually came from, she went to the doctors feeling suicidal and just overwhelmed by sounds, noises, just completely, um, yeah, just really, really struggling just with life, but not over something set. It was just existing like overstimulated essentially,
Mm.
and it was causing her to feel that bad that she was feeling
Was there a
suicidal.
trigger point of that as well, Shan? Was there anything
I
that
don't,
happened in her life that made her feel more overstimulated?
possibly, yeah. I think there was a couple of little things. I can't remember the timelines of it, but there definitely was maybe a few like family stuff that was going on at that time.
Yeah.
But she also has children, right? So I
I was
think
gonna
that's gonna,
say that's really common when you
yeah,
become a mum
to
and
be
you find
overstimulated.
obviously being a parent is overstimulating. Like you know, it's the
You
best but
can't listen to
hardest job
that
in the
music
world.
and all the different toys and all the different noises. I really struggle. So one of my same friend that was diagnosed is convinced that I'm autistic or like ADHD because I have really bad trouble with my ears, like being overstimulated by sound.
Mm.
But I've got other friends that I have those plug. They're not paying us, but loop headphones. I wear those. They're like in ear, like earplug
Yeah,
thingies
Todd's
that
got
take the
those.
decibels down.
Yeah.
Um, and they've just changed their marketing to be tailored towards mothers of
Do you know
children
the
and like
reason why I say
parents.
this is the side of TikTok I'm on at the moment, so maybe I need to investigate this. But It's a thing. Sometimes I've seen mums say to me, "Oh, like, I'm a really shit mum. I'm having a really bad day," and it's nothing to do with them. They're brilliant mums. It's the fact that they didn't realize they were neurodivergent, and then, like you say, Shan, if they're in the car and there's two kids crying at the same time, you've got nursery
Music,
rhymes,
yeah.
Coco Melon, being played at top volt, top decibels,
Toy
all
making noise in the
yeah.
background.
All of a sudden you feel like, "Oh my gosh, I can't cope with this. Like, this is too much. I need to take 5 minutes. I need to,"
Yeah.
and quite often that's why I asked, "Did your friend have a trigger point?" Because a lot of people say, "Actually, no, you're a brilliant mum. You're a really good mum, but you're just undiagnosed."
Yeah.
Because it can, like, there's days sometimes where I'll have it, because I've got two little ones, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is like, why is today so much harder?" And of
Yeah.
course, people that are non-neurodivergent obviously
You
still
still
have
get
this too.
overwhelmed, yeah.
But yeah, it's quite common that you suddenly realise that, yeah, that's the reason why you're finding it so much more
It's just
difficult than,
sensory
yes,
overload.
yeah, that's it, a sensory overload. And it's also like, because being a mum is very overstimulated. It's not just the sound; it's being touched nonstop to the point where
Touch
it does.
non-stop.
Sometimes, like, Todd will come home and he'll give me like a kiss and a cuddle and stuff. And there's days of, I'm a very cuddly person, aren't
Yeah,
I?
yeah, yeah. You are really cuddly, actually.
But I'd be like, "Oh my god, get away from me." Not because I don't
Yeah,
love
because you've had
him, but
kids
it's
clinging on
because,
you all day.
I've got one baby on the boob sometimes, another one in my arm, two dogs jumping up at me left, right, and centre because I've got two
Yeah,
sausage
and
dogs.
they would be inside you if they could. Like
Yeah,
whenever I come
no
in,
personal space.
like, but it doesn't exist. Like Malcolm will wrap himself round your neck,
Like
and
a
then you've got
scarf, a
Mabes on
sausage
you.
scarf.
Yeah, it's intense. There's a lot going
But
on.
that's what it is, isn't it? And
Yeah,
then, coupled with the extra sound and the noise and then the mental load of being a mum as well, it's so much going on in your brain
yeah,
to comprehend, and then, you can't switch off. That's the difference as well with being a parent. People that are neurodivergent, that are maybe just on their own or just have a partner, you can say, "I'm just going for a bath," or "I'm just going for a
yeah.
walk. I'm just going to take half an hour to myself." You can't do that when you're a mum.
No.
And if you do get in the bath, you're probably going to have
Yep, one
one get
with
in with
you.
you. Or yeah, so I totally get that, and I
Yeah.
I really understand
But
how.
her diagnosis changed her life
Wow.
because it enabled her to just understand a bit more. One, what triggers
What
her.
triggers it, yeah.
So is it sound? Is it visuals? Is it certain lighting? Is it certain material of clothes? Like she can't wear she likes to wear trousers that have got like a cuff at the bottom. She doesn't like them when they like hang around her
Mm,
ankles and things. Um
no way. It's like really specific things.
yeah, just which, I'm sure if anybody that's like autistic or has autistic children or family members, like that feel of things is a massive deal. Um and they just kind of talked her through it. She did a load of research, fixated on autism massively, hyper fixated on it. Was like, I want to understand myself, joined a load of groups on like Facebook and all those kind of different stuff. And then over time, she's just got to know herself a lot more and taken a lot of her masks down, and now feels like so authentically her because she
That's so
understands herself so
nice.
much better. Um, but that was a process. She had to speak to her husband about it. She had to like explain some things to her kids as well, because
Mm.
having her mask up on all these areas for so long, she'd reached a point where she couldn't hold them up anymore. Her mentally, she just couldn't keep doing it. It battered her down that much. Um, and yes, she had to have some really uncomfortable conversations with her husband and all those kind of things, which they were fine. They sorted it out. But I think
I bet that's scary though as well,
it
like having
is
to
because,
confront that and to say,
well, what you have to realize is like her husband married the masked version of her. So if she's going to take some of the layers down, her personality's going to
yeah,
change.
yeah, are you gonna like the real me, I
Yeah,
guess.
I think that was almost a conversation that she had to have. And that wasn't an easy conversation because,
The new and enhanced version. That's what I would say.
yeah, like, but also it's like, I agree. And luckily, listen, they're fine. There's
So
no
yeah, but
issues,
it can
but
call it, yeah, it can like, I've heard it before where, my friend that I was speaking about before, she has said to me in the past it's ruined relationships because some people just don't understand that that is who you are, and once you do get your diagnosis, you do have to make changes
of course you
because
do.
ultimately you've got to do the best thing for you and to be the healthiest version of yourself mentally and
Yeah.
physically too. So I bet that was really empowering for her though, like for her
It
to finally
was.
know.
I think now she feels more empowered, but it's been like a
It's been a process, a
process for
journey.
her to come to terms with the fact that her brain works slightly differently, come to terms with the fact that there was things that was doing that wasn't really helping herself, that she needs
Yeah,
to
yeah.
change, conversations with people, even like she's very direct. I love that about her because I'm also quite direct in the way that I am. I prefer that. I'm like I don't
Some people perceive it as rude though, don't they?
yes. And she's
Yeah.
definitely had that before. She like where people have said to her like, "Oh, you've got like a
What a
bit of a
bitch.
yeah, what a resting bitch face," or whatever. But it's never with that intent. But I think also over time because she's understood herself a bit more,
Yeah.
she doesn't some of that like exterior and things like that she is now aware of it, so it's kind of softened her a
How
little,
it's
how it's
perceived.
perceived a little bit.
Yeah.
um
Because
so
how would
yeah,
you
it's
know, I
just
suppose, until
we
somebody sort of
do.
calls it out, you wouldn't necessarily.
I
Because
also think
that's
as well, you just don't always
self-awareness.
pick up like if depending on everybody's autism is different. No, like two autistic people are the same or neurodivergent people are the same, but they don't always pick up on social, like people with
Social cues.
social cues.
Mm.
So, um,
Self-awareness is another one, isn't it?
yeah,
Like sometimes you might say something with all of the best intentions, and it can just be sort of misinterpreted. It's like, I know I'm not going to sort of say who this person was because it's not fair to. But what I did have to understand was there's somebody in my family who is disabled, and when my mum passed away, it was when it was very fresh and very raw,
yeah.
and she would often say to me,
Sorry, I'm not laughing. It's just because I know who
"You
it is.
you know
It's
you know what's coming, don't you?" And she'd say to me, "Law, where's your mum today? Where's your mum?" And
yeah,
she did know that she'd obviously passed away, but
yeah.
she wasn't doing it with malicious intent or anything. And I
No,
know some people would probably hear it and think, "Why does she keep asking where Laura's mum
but
is when
she
she's?"
doesn't.
But she didn't understand. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. And then of course I'd have to explain, and that was hard, especially in the early days.
yeah.
I was like, "Why do I have to keep repeating
Why
this
would
horrible,
you say
like the fact that my mum isn't here?" And then she'd be like, "Oh, is your mum died?" And I'd be like, "Oh my gosh!" But do you know what? She doesn't understand that. She doesn't know that
that?
it's
No,
hurtful. She doesn't
she doesn't understand your
realize.
grief either. Like she
Yeah, that's
doesn't.
the thing. That sort of complex understanding of grief that she didn't get, and I'm so glad she doesn't, because you wouldn't wish it on
No.
anybody, would you? But I remember having to think that and to take a step back in how I responded to it, because actually, like, she didn't understand, and she would continue to say it because she just wasn't aware
Yeah.
of what was going on.
But also she's possibly intrigued, like,
Gosh, yeah.
she's heard everybody talking about it, and she's like, "Hold on, where is Laura's mum?
It's
Like,
a
what
very
is
bizarre
going on?"
concept, isn't it? The
Yeah.
fact that, death is, like we were saying on the previous episode, where do they go? Like, how can somebody be here and exist 1 minute and all of a sudden they're gone? They're not
Mm.
anywhere on this earth. And I think that's probably where a little bit of it came from. It was the intrigue. But then other people have said to me, and again, it's not in a nasty way, they're not trying to get any sort of negative response from you. They're intrigued by how you respond.
Yeah.
Because obviously I was very emotional.
Yeah, so she maybe saw that and was like,
And then
"Oh."
she'd give me a hug and stuff. So I don't know if it was
Yeah.
like partially she wanted to I don't know. I obviously I don't understand the ins and outs of this sort of stuff, and
Yeah,
it
and
must
that's
be
not
very complicated.
neurodiversity, by the way. She's
She's
obviously,
yeah,
yeah,
this is
she's disabled.
disability, but it's just understanding that too, and me being kind and conscious of how I responded. Where there'd be some days where I'd be like, "Oh, please stop asking me that."
No, but I think that goes across so many. I remember when I went back to work, um, there was one of the cleaners at work there that I used to get on. I used to speak to him every day. Like he was so
Aww.
lovely. He's like the nice guy, but English wasn't his first language. So like our conversations were always like a little bit broken in terms of like trying to get messages across. But you could just, you could tell someone's got like a really good heart. So I used to speak to him every day. I'm not sure he always understood what I was saying, but so anyway, when I was off, he noticed. But again, because English isn't his first language, like if anybody else have heard it, they might have thought he was being rude, but he wasn't being. But when I came back and I said, "Oh, he said, I'm not seeing you. Like, where have you been?" I said, "Oh, I've been off. My dad died." And he went, "Well, how did he die?" And obviously, because my dad committed suicide, or sorry, not committed. I hate saying that, because my dad died by suicide. I had to say, like in the middle of the office, like, well, he killed himself. Like, I didn't know. And because I was so emotional, I didn't know how to word it better either.
Yeah, you said it quite literally, yeah.
So I said it really literally, where I was like, well, he killed himself. Like, and he was like, oh. And he's quite religious as well. And I know some religions, they don't, like they've got certain views on it too. So it just was a very awkward interaction. But I just felt really sorry for him, because obviously his intent was just to see.
Of course it was, yeah.
Was to find out what had happened. And, he said to me after, I'm going to pray for you. I'll pray for you. And I thought, well, thank you. Like,
oh, bless him.
Like, he was a really, really nice guy. Really nice guy. But again, it's just like understanding the difference of, it doesn't even have to be neurodiversity. It could be different cultures, different understandings of death, like people, someone with a disability, possibly with a mental age a lot younger than they are, like not understanding what is or isn't appropriate to say. I seen something the other day on social media. It absolutely made me laugh. And it was not to do with whatever, but it's just similar subject. This little girl was saying to her mum, oh, mummy, I love that dress of yours. Like, I really like that dress. And then later they were walking to the tops and she said, mummy, when you die, can I have that?
Yeah.
She's obviously like 4 or 5, like she's really
got her eyes on that one.
Yeah, that's she's like already prizing up her mum's possessions. Like, oh, when she dies, I love
that's
that.
Mine.
Yeah,
that's
but it just one. Again, kids don't have that filter, do they? But sometimes some adults don't. So you've got to just kind of say, well, what's the intent? Like, are they trying to be nice? Okay, then it's like, don't take it to heart. Like you said, you would never have, at that time it was hard.
That was
when
awful.
she was saying that to you.
Stop asking where she is.
But
please.
You can't lose your temper, because it's like, well, she doesn't mean it in that way. She's not trying to hurt my feelings.
No, it teaches you patience.
Yes, which can be difficult. Do you want to talk about the comment that we got, and we can kind of add to it a little bit more? Because I think we've got plenty of like parents that listen and all different stuff.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we were having a chat about this before. And this is why I had a conversation actually separate to this, but related in a lot of respects, is that I've got a friend at the moment who isn't sure if she wants children.
It's not me, is it?
Well, actually, it's Shan. No. And she was just talking about sort of, if she's not old by any means, but she's getting to that point where she's thinking, I need to think about it in the next few years, just because of biological clock, etc. And she was saying that a friend close to her had a little boy, and unfortunately had quite some quite serious physical disabilities, and that petrified her. And she was really open and honest about it. And I said that, you're being super vulnerable to say it. But she said, I don't know if part of me doesn't want to be a mum because I'm worried that my child might have some sort of disability.
And they won't be able to handle it.
Yeah, that's essentially what she said. And she said, I also love my
Very
life.
Self-aware.
And that's what I said to her. I said, that's really selfless, because I think that is something people forget to think about sometimes. Like, if you want to have children, you do have to think about, unfortunately, the possibility that there could be something that isn't what you expect. And this is
super interesting. Sorry, before you get to that, I've been watching a TV show called Toxic Town.
Oh, it's so sad.
I've got 1 episode left. But it's based on a true story, isn't it? I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's on Netflix, but it's about a town is it Nottingham?
Corby.
Northampton, Corby. I can't remember exactly where it is. Where unfortunately there was like a chemical that they dug up an area that had like a really high like cyanide. Another one, I can't remember what it was, like calcium, which basically it got into the air in that whole area for miles round, and there was a really high number of children that were born with birth defects.
Yeah.
And one of the stories is like this little boy, he was born and his hand obviously was impacted, and the dad left, just walked, like came home the wife came home one day and he was packing his bags and he was like, I can't look at him, I can't touch him. And it broke my heart, because I was like, that poor like little boy, just because he's been born with like, a hand that doesn't look like my hand, or a hand that doesn't look exactly how you anticipate it to be.
It's heartbreaking.
You would walk away. But it's like you said, Law, I also understand it from a point of view, and I think people should think about it. Could I handle that?
We
If I
did.
can't, should I be
I
having
can honestly say,
children?
hand on heart, because you can get tests. You offered them, you don't have to have them,
Yeah.
but you can have tests done to look at certain syndromes and certain disabilities, and a lot of people decide not to,
Yeah, which is
which
fair
is
enough.
absolutely fair enough. We decided to go ahead, and would it have made a difference to how I felt? I'll be honest, yeah, probably,
Yeah.
and I think that's okay to say. Would I have loved the child any less? No.
No.
But it's different. It does change the way that your life is. And I can, Todd's little sister, for example, has Down syndrome. She's an incredible girl. She really is. But of course, that has had a different dynamic on Todd's family
Yeah.
and how they've navigated through life and that sort of stuff and how her life has
Yeah,
been.
and how your future helps, because if you're a parent that gives birth to a child that is going to need support beyond
Your
17,
lifetime as well.
18, or beyond your lifetime,
Mm.
you have to, it's not like oh yeah, well, when they're 18 and we've shipped them all off, we'll have time for ourselves. Well, that's not going to be like that for every
It's a
family.
lifelong condition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some families, for instance, Todd's mum and dad, his sister will be with them
Forever.
forever, until, unfortunately, they might she might outlive them, she might not, 'cause unfortunately with Down syndrome, you do have a lot,
Yeah, you just don't know.
the death rate's a lot lower, isn't it? Or the age of
It's higher now than it was,
yeah,
which is
which is
amazing.
amazing. But
But
it's certainly a conversation, and that
oh, you have
you've
to
had to
think
have
about
as a
it.
family, and
Yeah.
say, well, what happens when Todd's mum and dad are no longer here, if his sister still is, and what does that look like within the family unit? So it's definitely something that you've got to think about. If you're Listen, I know some people fall pregnant and they're not had a conversation about this sort of stuff beforehand, like, absolutely. But when you're going through that process of, do I want a kid? Do I not want a kid? I'm pregnant. Do I want to keep it? Do I not want to keep it? Which is definitely things that people will be thinking about. They are things that you have to consider.
Yeah, it's a huge thing, and actually, I think it's a really responsible thing to have the conversation because Todd and I did, and I
Yeah.
know a lot of people don't, but I in my head I was
But
thinking,
probably because he's got
yeah, maybe that was sort of
siblings.
on his mind, I guess. And I suppose if you've got some sort of predisposed conditions potentially in your family, I don't think syndrome is genetic. To be fair, I don't know.
I'm not sure, actually. Maybe maybe we can look into that
Yeah,
afterwards. It's definitely like it's your you're missing a
yeah,
chromosome. So
yeah, yeah.
it's from that perspective, but I don't know if it's like passed
Yeah,
down.
but
But
I suppose it's interesting that the people automatically think, "Oh, like let's look into that." And like I said, it wouldn't have changed how we felt, but I
it would have
sorry,
changed how you
it wouldn't
prepared.
have changed how how much we love the child. But I do think there would have been part of us that thought, "Oh, well, things would have been different."
Yeah, of
And
course.
again, that's a natural human response, right? It doesn't make you a bad person, but yeah, this is the reason why I'm talking about this is just to sort of as a bit of a to preface one of the listeners' comments. So we recently did an episode, of course, where we just talked about grieving the loss of maybe yourself or um new
A
self-discovery,
relationship or
relationships,
anything.
all that kind of stuff. And this is what this particular listener took out of that. So she said, um, I have a son with autism, and it was explained to me the other day that I will go through a grieving periods because I will grieve the child that I thought I was going to have. I love my son no matter what. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's okay. It's completely normal to go through those periods of thinking, what if, and had I had a child that was, stereotypically normal, what
Yeah.
would that have looked like? And it absolutely does not make you a bad person. Like,
No.
it's just a process that you have to go through in your head. And of course, you love your son more than anything. I think it's really sad
Yeah,
actually
that you
that
have to
you
say
have to
that.
say that because nobody would judge you. Well, unfortunately, maybe some people would, but I'd like to think most people understand. Actually, if you have a child that is neurodivergent, has SEN issues or physical disabilities, of course you are going to grieve what you would have had your
Yeah.
child not have had any of those conditions. And that's completely normal because you've got to figure out, well, how do you care for a child with
Yeah.
those different disabilities or conditions? How do you make sure that they're happy and looked after? And then equally, the horrible thing to think about, and I think that's where the listeners end comment comes in, of course you love your son more than anything.
Yeah.
But society isn't always
No.
accepting. It's better than it was, definitely. And I think leaps have been made towards being a more accepting society on that front. But unfortunately, there are still negative connotations,
Connotations.
and some people are just quite cruel.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And the other side of it is, I'm really grateful for that comment. So maybe we wouldn't have done this episode on this topic had we
yeah,
not
thank
have we
you.
not got it. So thank you so much. But I don't know how comfortable a lot of mums would have been to have made that comment and been open about the fact that they are maybe feeling a little bit
But
sad
most would
about
have
a
thought it.
diagnosis.
Most would have thought it because let's be realistic, and I don't mean that. I hope people take this with the spirit it's intended. But when you're trying for a baby and you fall pregnant, realistically, you aren't naturally thinking in your head, "My child's going to have." X disability or X
Yeah,
condition. You're just not thinking that way. Like naturally you just think and hope in your head, oh, I'm just going to
they're
be healthy.
healthy.
And unfortunately that isn't always the case. So I really thank the listener for that and being so vulnerable to say that, because every parent has been through that. It
Mm,
doesn't matter who you are, whether you've got family history of conditions, like it is a natural thing. It is a natural thing to think if you do find out that your child is going to have some sort of impairment, disability,
yeah.
condition, it's quite scary.
But also,
Must
it's
be.
how society will treat that child as well.
Of
It
course
might be
it
that
is.
you've got no concerns about looking after a child with disability, no concerns about looking after a child that's neurodivergent, but you might have concerns about what happens when my kid goes to school. Will they be accepted? Will they be able to go to a mainstream school? Or do I need to, someone I know has just literally really had to battle to get a diagnosis of autism for their son. So in time before he starts school,
Mm.
because he's nonverbal, so she knew that if he went into a mainstream school, he may struggle because he can't vocalize what he needs.
What he
He's
needs,
able
yeah.
to show what he needs. He just can't vocalize it. He'll pull you, he'll drag you,
And
whatever.
kids, unfortunately,
If you're different, you get
they can be
picked
nasty. Even,
on.
I mean, obviously this is going on yonks now, but I've worn glasses since I was 18 months old.
Yeah. Oh, really? That
Yeah,
young?
yeah,
Wow.
year and a half. So for a year and a half of my
Oh,
life,
your little
couldn't
baby
see.
with glasses on. I can't
Oh
go.
god, they were awful. It's like Deirdre Barlow glasses. They were massive, just these enormous
Laura, I don't mean to
gigs.
lie, but you have got huge glasses
They're
on now,
cool
but they're
now.
cool now.
Yeah, but imagine an 18-month-old and bloody, like basically space sauces on her head. But yeah, and it doesn't really bother me now. But at the time, kids used to call you Specky Four
Oh,
Eyes,
stop.
right?
That makes me so sad. I was desperate to have glasses when I was a kid.
yeah. God, I wasn't. Honestly, I hated it. It's so heartbreaking. But unfortunately, I have terrible eyesight. I have like very
Yeah,
severe
yours is really
astigmatism.
bad.
So it wasn't even like, even now I can't get contact lenses, for example. But I've worn them since I was like 1.5. So
Yeah.
they are. I now like I've accepted that they're a part of me, and so it makes me laugh sometimes when people are like, "Oh, you really suit glasses." I think, well, it's a bloody good job. But yeah, even then, like it's not even that big a deal. Like really
No.
having like bad eyesight is quite common, but that used to really bother me. I'd go home and be
Mm,
like, "Oh, like people call me
be
Specky Four
mean to
Eyes,"
me.
and I remember that from primary school.
Oh, well, I like
So
kids can just be horrible. Like my stepson's had things said to him about, like your eyebrows and stuff
oh,
like that. And when you're that young, you're so self-conscious as well.
of
Like
course
you're
you
so,
are.
everything like it, you're worried that what people think, and you care about what people think a lot more than what you do as you get older. I just think it's really, really difficult. So yeah, I agree. I think we replied to the comment and just said, that is perfectly
Of
understandable,
course it
because
is.
similar to how I talk about with my dad and how Laura talks about with her mum in that terms of grief, like it's the missed opportunities, it's the missed
It's the
um
what could have been, and I
what
get
could have
that. Yeah, you
been.
do. Of course, you grieve that because let's be
Doesn't mean that you're not going to have a loads of amazing memories that could be even better than
and just
that,
an
but
incredible child, regardless.
it's still what was in your head is what you are grieving. Whether that mean that you have a
100%.
better experience because
100%.
your child's neurodiverse, or let's be real, sometimes it can be difficult. I've got other friends, unfortunately, that have have really struggled with one, support from doctors, support
Mm.
from schools. They've got a child that is not only autistic but struggles with their hearing and stuff like that as well, and it's just been an absolute mess, and they've had to pay to go private,
So it's
and it's
just so
really
sad.
difficult. And realistically, as much as they would do absolutely anything for their son, they would go back to the ends of the earth for him, they didn't visualize that
Still, they didn't expect
being
that
what.
hardship about
Yeah,
having to navigate some of the really difficult stuff, because
like, really, you shouldn't have to battle to get support from a school, should you?
you shouldn't, but it's so common.
It's
It's
very
very common
common.
because, poor teachers at the moment, you couldn't pay me
I
enough to
know.
be one. The
Oh,
stuff that they go
Paula.
through. No, it's mad though, isn't it? The amount of
Yeah,
poor teachers at the moment that are signed off on the sick and stuff because they just don't have the level of support they
yeah,
need. And I think that's the other thing with this. Like, you need to be able to trust that your child has what they need if they have additional support needs. And
yeah,
also, similar to what we said before, I can't imagine how difficult it is if you have a neurodivergent child and you are undiagnosed yourself as being neurodivergent.
yeah,
Because that's another element that plays into
yeah.
it, isn't it? And it's like trying to understand this little person that needs you and needs you to sort of be able to give your all, when actually you yourself might not be able to regulate your emotions. And yeah, it's just so multifaceted. And I also think with that, grief periods of expecting just like a sort of atypical child, that's so normal. And I'm sure she won't mind me saying, but my mother-in-law went through it,
Yeah, of course she did.
and because you.
Because she's had 2 children that she's brought up in a very particular
Yeah, of
way,
course, and it's just it
and then
rocks your world. And
yeah,
even like, you know, little Daisy, for the first 6 months of her life, she was in and out of holiday. She had a hole in her heart, right? So people automatically think, oh, Down syndrome, there's some of the typical things that come to your head in terms of that
yeah,
disability. But did you know a lot of Down syndrome children are born with a hole in the heart? So
yeah.
it's also like
So surgery
the
straight
physical stuff
away.
she had to go through. Like, I can't imagine, like, even when Sienna or Eleni like have a cough, I freak out. If I see the slightest like red mark, I'm like, oh my gosh, is it measles? Is it a rash?
Yeah,
And then for you to have to put your child into that type of surgery to make them better, just
yeah.
I can't even imagine. And just shout out to all the parents that go through all of these extra things to be the best
Well,
parents that you can be to your child.
I'll go back to that series that we were talking as well, like that Toxic Town, because then as like a mother, she had to decide whether to put her child through a number of different surgeries to try and, I don't know, he had like not really any fingers or any
Yeah, his
bones
fingers
in his fingers,
hadn't formed, so they were taking his toes off
and
too.
putting them onto his
Yeah.
hand, and he'd already had like 7 or 8 surgeries and had an infection, and then he got really poorly, and she's trying to do right by her son,
He was
but
in
at the
agony,
same
wasn't he?
time, eventually he got to the age where he said, I
"I
like my
don't want this
hand, I don't
anymore,
want
mum."
this anymore, mum. But that poor mum is only been trying to help because she thought that he would oh, it's so hard. Being a
It is.
parent is so, so hard. Even as a step parent, like, there's just so much, you're playing so much into these little, like, people's lives, and it's just so hard to
And you're
just.
responsible like,
Yeah.
I think even just the responsibility of wanting your child to be a good person, like, you just wanna do the
Yeah.
best that you can to make sure that they have as much love, support, quality of life, all of that kind of stuff, and you just wanna make sure you're doing everything that you can to make sure
Yeah.
they're happy and that they go through life in the right way. And unfortunately, if any of these situations happen where somebody's cruel, you being able to, empower them into saying, so I say it to Sienna every day. We go on the way to nursery, she gets a bit anxious some days, particularly on a Monday. I think it's because she
The
spent,
Monday scaries.
yeah, basically, she spent a number of days with me.
Well,
Because
yeah,
I,
because she does Thursday, Friday at home with you, doesn't she? So
exactly.
she goes Thursday,
And
Friday,
she
Saturday,
knows. They're
Sunday.
so intuitive kids, aren't they? Like,
Yeah.
she knows the route, she knows everything. And she gets really panicked, and really unsettled, and it's awful. Like, it breaks my heart. Like, when you get that lump in your throat, all mums will know it, and dads when you drop them off at
Yeah.
nursery. Um, and I always just say to her, we have a chat about it now. We talk about it, so I preempt it. I know that like it's
Mm.
coming, and I always say to her like, Sienna is brave, Sienna is creative, Sienna is
Oh.
courageous. Sienna is loving, and I put like new words into it every day, also to try and help with her vocab, But she repeats it back to me, and she understands it now, and it just takes her mind off things. It's like distracts
Yeah.
her, and she
Oh,
knows
I
now
love
like
that. Like little affirmations.
basically, yeah. And then she goes in, and I always say to her like, Sienna's kind, and that's one of the things I always cling on to. I'm always like, that's really important. You've got to go in and be kind to your friends, and yeah, it's just little things like that I
Yeah.
think just really go a long way with kids. But yeah, thank you so much for that comment, because that's, yeah, it's an eye opener for Shannon and I, and we just wanted to open up that conversation a bit more.
Yeah, because
So
listen, like we hope we've not said anything that's like, anyone would take personally, because we're talking only from our
yeah, of
experience
course,
of it.
yeah.
And to be honest, if me and Laura are being completely honest, we don't know the ins and outs of it, and not like, we probably know a bit more because we've got close people in our lives that have that have either got autism themselves or have got kids, or
No one's been in your shoes
neurodivergent.
though. My mum always used to say that. She
Exactly.
used to say, walk a day in somebody else's shoes before you pass comments. So
Yeah. So we obviously from our side, we just think it's such a big topic. I feel like there's so much conversation about it at the moment, and sometimes it's not positive conversation, and that really bugs me because there's so many people out there that um that could really impact
yeah.
in terms of making like passing comments about it, or not really thinking before you speak. And I like to think that we do regularly try to think about things and think about the way that we talk about stuff, not because we're worried about anybody listening, but that's just who we are as people. We would never want to upset anybody. But what we do want to do is open up some of these topics to be spoken out a bit more. And although this is one that's spoken about more regularly, I don't think you can have enough people speaking about it, if I'm honest, because it impacts so many people. And as the years go on, yeah, you are going to hear more people being diagnosed with different
Neurodiversity.
neurodivergence, because guess what, when we were younger, people did a really fucking shit job at diagnosing kids that needed it. So now we're taking accountability as adults to say, no, I want to go and find out why I struggle with these things, because it makes my life difficult. And if that means you get diagnosed with being ADHD, or it means you get diagnosed with autism, or it might be anxiety or PTSD, guess what?
It's only going to help you and everyone else around you. And we get it. It must be incredibly difficult to have to even lead up to that point to know that you
Yeah.
need some of that
So don't let people
intervention.
take
But
that away from you
no, it's really
either.
brave to do it as well. So
Yeah, and I think own it as well. Like, take it, go through that period. If you're grieving it and you feel a bit crappy about your diagnosis, okay, I get
it's
that. And
normal.
that's so normal. Like, don't try and brush that aside. Let yourself sit with it. Let yourself understand
And you're
it.
still you. I
Yes.
think, please don't feel like you're a completely different person because you're diagnosed. You're still yourself. It's
Yeah.
just that there's parts of you that you're going to unlock and you're going to understand a lot better. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And we love all of you anyway. So
we do.
there you go. But thank you for listening. Give us a follow on social media, all of our platforms, subscribe on YouTube. If you can give us a little review on Spotify, that would be fabulous. And yeah, we hope to hear from you next week. Please send over any comments or stories that you want us to talk about. We're going to start picking some more out. So even if you've not messaged us sort of directly DMs, we'll pick some of the comments out and use them as topics of conversation, because they seem to be kind of good ideas, better than me and Laura
We want them
probably
to be
could come up
relatable. We
with.
don't want to just be talking about the stuff that is important to us.
Yeah, it's
It's
like, I don't know
important
if
to
you know,
talk
but our
about you.
parents are dead.
Oh.
But obviously that's still a big part of the podcast. But yeah, we just want to make sure that we're going into a couple of different areas. But yeah, see you all soon.
See you soon.